It's time now for an in-depth look at the global markets this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Kiwoom Securities. Mr. Yu, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
So just ahead of this week's Fed meeting, U.S. stocks were up a little bit. The Dow about 0.1%, the S&P the same. What was driving the gains overnight, and how about Asian markets?
Yes, as for the U.S. market, particularly the NASDAQ has shown some rise. It showed 0.62% rise because of the specific news on M&A deals. Pfizer announced that it will acquire Array BioPharma, which is an anti-cancer drug manufacturer, for $11.4 billion. And that resulted into Array BioPharma rising by 56.9% on one day, and also Pfizer rising by 0.28%. Any cancer treatment companies such as Incyte, Robens, and Turning Point Therapeutics all risen by somewhere between 5 to 15% in terms of stock prices. As a result, anything related to bio-related ETFs, which is XBI and IBB and various others, has shown quite significant rise. That kind of triggered to the Asian market. If you look at the Shanghai, firmly the index itself was flat, but the Shenzhen index has risen by about 0.3%. As for Korea, it was kind of opposite, where the Korean KOSPI has risen by 0.38%, but the KOSDAK was down by 0.59%, and also the Nikkei was down 0.72%. I think that the market is still kind of concerned in regards to the U.S.-China trade talks, even though there's a possibility of the rate cut coming through on probably in July. The meetings for the FOMC this week is not going to have any kind of rate cut coming through, and that's the reason why the investors are still cautious in terms of investing heavily in expectation of liquidity increase in the market.
Got it. Well, the U.S. measures against Huawei, the Chinese tech giant, have really dealt a blow. As we just heard, the company says the blacklisting is going to cost it some $30 billion this year and next. Its competitors and its business partners, therefore, have been eyeing Korean companies now. What's Huawei planning to do about all this?
Right. If you hear the news, the Huawei CEO, the founder, Ran Zhangfei, said that company revenue will be about $100 billion for 2019 and 2020. That means about $30 billion hit to the revenue versus its previous forecast. Now, this is clearly a negative news for the company. If you look at it, they've been, increasing the shares very aggressively, and last year they have generated close to $100 billion in profits, in revenues. But going into the future, there is not going to be any growth in terms of the revenues. So clearly, the biggest hit will be coming from the mobile sales, because the U.S. blacklist restricts the American businesses selling products to Chinese Huawei, and most of those supplies are related to the phone productions. The Bloombergs and other foreign forecasters are estimating that the smartphone shipment will decline by somewhere between 40 to 60 million units this year. That could be clearly blow to the market share for Huawei. And in terms of who will be gaining that market share, most of the people expect that to be Samsung and somewhat for the Apple. Right now, if you look at the market share, Samsung has 20.3% market share in terms of the handsets, but it is expected to rise to 24.5% in terms of the market share. As for the Huawei, currently they hold about 14% in market share, but it is expected to go down to 9.2% in the future. So that is definitely good news for Samsung Electronics. But as for the other part of the business, clearly the components-related supplies will be damaged because the Huawei will not be able to produce as much in terms of the handset. Clearly, the memory semiconductors such as the DRAM and RAM flash will be having some difficulties, and also display panels as well as the OLED related parts plays. So clearly that is negative news. But as for the Samsung, that is only 2 to 2.5% of total sales. The impact is not going to be as much. Whereas the SK Hynix, the semiconductor company, obviously estimates that about 10 to 15% of total sales will be affected. So yes, it is a mixed news. Clearly, the major players, Samsung Electronics, will be benefiting from this kind of change.
Right. Well, real quick, with this trade war going on, China's been reducing its holdings of U.S. Treasuries compared to last year. They're down around $70 billion. Is this a card China can play when they meet the U.S. next week at the G20, or what else might they want to do?
I think that's probably difficult. I don't think that the reducing the U.S. Treasury will be a good news for China. If you look at it, the U.S. Treasury is the safest asset for foreign investors, and there's a high demand. And as you can see that the 10-year Treasury bond rate has fallen to 2.1% from last year's 3.2%. So it is becoming a bit expensive now. But nevertheless, still there's a huge demand, and that's the reason why the rates were going down. Now, if you look at China holding a total amount of foreign reserve of $3 trillion U.S. dollars, including the U.S. bond holdings, versus it has external debt of about $2 trillion. So if you're trying to pay off that external debt, clearly the foreign reserve will be going down very significantly. Yes, they can withstand the foreign outflows, but if the currency depreciates too fast, well above, say, 7 yuan to dollars, then that's going to be a very negative news for the Chinese corporate balance sheets, which will be definitely major negatives. Now, China's corporate debt is about 150% of the GDP, which is one of the highest numbers. So clearly, we need to see that number coming down. So they can't really use the Treasury selling to probably have a better deals in terms of the U.S.-China trade talk. I think that they're not going to have much other cards except the rare earth cards and some other cards where they can pump up the domestic economies. But in general, that is actually boosting the economy by themselves rather than trying to negotiate with the U.S. So I think that they will meet on the 29th, 28th in G20 meetings. In terms of whether some kind of outcome will come out, I doubt that. But nevertheless, they are in need to negotiate, and we do think that some kind of deal will be struck before the end of the year.
All right, Mr. Yu, that's where we're going to have to leave it today. Thank you for coming on again. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.